The shoes were wrong. That was the first thing Hector Wynne noticed when the woman stepped out of the cab in front of Meridian Financial Tower. Not her age, not her briefcase, not the quiet way she stood on the sidewalk and looked up at 47 floors of glass and steel like she was reading something written there. The shoes. Brown leather flats, worn at the heel, the kind that had walked 10,000 miles and had the creases to prove it. Everything else she wore was precise: charcoal blazer, pressed slacks, silver at her ears. But those shoes belonged to a different story, a harder one. He watched her from the security desk. 40 years in this building, first as a beat cop in the 6th District, then 12 years contracting with private firms before Meridian took him on full time. He knew how people walked through that lobby. The ones who belonged walked like the marble floor, owed them something. The ones who didn't looked at everything twice. She looked at nothing twice. She walked straight to the elevator bank, pressed the button for 41, and waited with her hands folded in front of her, holding a manila folder the way you'd hold something that mattered. Hector almost let it go. Almost. Ma'am. He came around the desk. That floor's executive-only access. Do you have your badge? She turned and looked at him the way people do when they're deciding whether to be patient or not. She chose patient. I have a 9 o'clock with the board. Your name? Iris Beaumont-Cole. He ran it through the system. Nothing. He ran it again with just the last name. Still nothing. He looked up at her and saw something he recognized. Not embarrassment, not anger, just a very old exhaustion with a very specific situation. Let me call upstairs, he said. Please. He dialed the executive assistant on 41. The phone rang 4 times. A young man picked up with the tone of someone managing multiple screens and one too many problems. Hector explained. There was a pause, the kind that means searching, and then, I don't have anyone by that name on the calendar. Hector relayed this. Iris Beaumont-Cole opened the manila folder and produced a single printed email. She held it out. He read it. The email was from Gerald Ashworth, Chief Financial Officer of Meridian Capital Group, sent Thursday at 6:14 p.m. It said, Iris, the board has reviewed your preliminary findings and requests your formal presentation Monday. Boardroom A. G. Hector. Britt read it twice. He called the executive floor again and read the email aloud. Another pause. Then, Mr. Ashworth isn't in yet, and I still don't have a record of this guest in the system. He handed the email back. I'm sorry, Ms. Beaumont-Cole. I can't authorize elevator access without confirmation from someone upstairs. She nodded. She had expected this. That was the worst part. Not the refusal, but that she had expected it completely. She sat in one of the lobby chairs near the window and placed the folder on her knees and waited. Hector went back to his desk. He called the executive floor 3 more times in the next 20 minutes. Twice, no answer. Once, the same young man, who said Mr. Ashworth still hadn't arrived and suggested she reschedule. At 9:14, 2 men came through the revolving door together, both in suits that cost more than Hector's monthly mortgage. One was around 50, broad-shouldered, carrying a leather portfolio. The other was younger, 40 maybe, with the energetic walk of someone who billed by the hour and wanted you to know it. Hector recognized the older one, Davis Falk, Senior Managing Director, 32nd floor. Falk saw Iris Beaumont-Cole sitting in the lobby. His stride didn't slow, but something changed in it. He leaned toward the younger man and said something that made the younger man glance over. The younger man laughed, not a polite laugh, not even a careless one, the kind of laugh that lands. Iris did not look up. Falk stopped at the elevator and pressed the button and waited. He was close enough to the desk that Hector could hear him. That's not still the woman from the board email, is it? He asked the younger man. Has to be. Who else would be sitting in a lobby at 9 in the morning with a folder? Gerald's going to hear about this from Harmon, Falk said. Bringing in someone like that for a restructuring analysis. The board is going to think we've completely lost the plot. The elevator opened. They stepped in. The door closed. Hector had heard things like this before. In 40 years of watching lobbies, he'd learned not to carry them. But something about the way Iris Beaumont-Cole had not looked up, not flinched, not shifted, just stayed completely still, made him feel it land differently this time. He walked over. "Can I get you a coffee, Ms. Beaumont-Cole? There's a machine in the break room that's actually decent." She looked up. Something in her face relaxed by maybe 3 degrees. "Thank you. Black is fine." He came back with 2 cups and sat in the chair across from her. It was against about 7 unwritten rules, but he'd outlasted every manager who'd ever written them. "You want to tell me what's actually in that folder?" he asked. She looked at him for a moment. Then she opened it. The folder contained 41 pages. Hector was no financial analyst, but he'd sat in enough boardroom overflow security posts to know what certain charts meant. The ones she showed him first were debt exposure maps, color-coded, layered, with subsidiary lines that branched like root systems. She walked him through one page without being asked. Meridian's commercial real estate arm took on 3 leveraged positions in 2021 and 2022, she said. 2 regional mall complexes in the southeast and a mixed-use development outside Cleveland. All 3 are currently in technical default. The exposure, if all 3 call their collateral simultaneously, is $412 million. After existing reserves, that leaves a gap of approximately $270 million that the parent company would need to absorb within 90 days. Hector looked at the number. That would restructure the firm. Yes. Does the board know? The board knows there are liquidity concerns. That's the language in the last quarterly. She closed the folder. The board does not know the specific figures I just told you. Gerald Ashworth commissioned my analysis because he suspected the internal numbers were being smoothed. He was right. They were being smoothed by a significant margin. By who? She looked at the elevator bank. That, she said, is what I'm here to present. Hector sat with that for a moment. Then he stood up, went back to his desk, and called the building's general security line. Not the executive floor, but the Meridian corporate line, the one that went to the head of internal compliance. He'd had that number for 11 years and never used it. He used it now. The woman who answered knew who he was. He explained the situation. He read her the email. He said the name Iris Beaumont-Cole clearly and slowly and spelled it. There was a pause of about 4 seconds. "Don't let her leave," the woman said. Gerald Ashworth arrived at 9:31, breathing like he'd been running. He came through the revolving door with his jacket half on and saw Iris in the lobby chair and stopped walking entirely for 1 full second. "I am so sorry," he said, crossing the lobby. "My calendar sync failed completely. I had it in the system, but it didn't push to the front desk, and I only saw the security flag when I—" He stopped. He looked at her face. "How long have you been here?" 32 minutes, she said. He looked at Hector. Hector said nothing. Ashworth pulled out his phone and typed something. 30 seconds later, the young man from the executive floor called the desk and gave Iris Beaumont-Cole full 41 access, confirmed and logged. In the elevator, Ashworth said, "I want you to know the board received your preliminary summary last week, all 7 members." The response was, he paused, choosing the word, "Significant. Significant how? Half of them want to know how quickly the exposure can be contained. The other half want to know who authorized the positions in the first place." He looked at her. "Your name came up in a specific context." "Which was?" Harmon said. "This is a direct quote. I don't know who this woman is or where Gerald found her, but she clearly doesn't understand how commercial real estate risk is structured at the institutional level." Iris said nothing. "He said it in front of the full board," Ashworth added. "I want you to know that." "I know," she said. "I assumed something like that." The elevator opened on 41. She walked out first. Boardroom A was at the end of a corridor lined with framed photographs of Meridian's founding partners, their names in brass plates beneath them, every one of them white, every one of them male, every one of them photographed with the particular ease of people who had never sat in a lobby waiting for someone to confirm they were supposed to be there. Iris looked at none of them. She pushed open the door to Boardroom A. There were 9 people at the table. 7 board members. Ashworth came in behind her, and at the far end, standing rather than was Davis Falk, who had been at the elevator that morning. He saw her and his expression did something complicated. She set her folder down at the presenter's position and opened her laptop and connected to the room's display system without asking anyone's help. because she had been in enough boardrooms to know where the HDMI port was before she ever saw the table. "Good morning," she said. "My name is Iris Beaumont-Cole. For those of you who don't have full context, I spent 19 years as a senior analyst at the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, with primary oversight on regional financial institution stress testing. I left federal service in 2019 to consult privately. Gerald asked me to conduct an independent audit of Meridian's commercial real estate exposure following a discrepancy he identified in Q3 internal reporting. This is what I found." She clicked to the first slide. The room was quiet in a specific way, the kind of quiet that happens when people who are used to controlling information realize they are about to receive some. "Before I begin," said the man at the far right of the table, broad, silver-haired, with the posture of someone who expected chairs to adjust to him, "I want it on record that this presentation was not formally approved through standard board procedures. Gerald commissioned this unilaterally, and that's a governance question we can address afterward, Harmon," Ashworth said. "Right now, I'd like to hear the findings." Harmon Price. It was Harmon Price, 63 years old, board chair for 9 years, the man who had built 3 of Meridian's largest acquisition strategies, looked at Iris the way Davis Falk had looked at her in the lobby that morning, like she was something to be reclassified. "I'd like to know," Price said, in the measured tone of someone who had learned to perform calm, "what qualifications exactly allow you to assess an institutional portfolio of this complexity? Because what I'm reading in your preliminary summary is a level of alarm that I find. The current framework for assessing collateralized commercial exposure under Basel III stress parameters," Iris said evenly, "requires 3 things: accurate loan-to-value ratios on the underlying assets, current delinquency rates from the servicers, and honest mark-to-market valuation on the debt positions. What I found in Meridian's internal reporting was that all 3 of those inputs had been adjusted." Silence. "Adjusted how?" Ashworth asked, though Iris suspected he already knew. "The loan-to-value ratios were calculated using 2021 property appraisals, not updated appraisals. 2021. The Southeast Mall complexes have lost between 31 and 38% of their assessed value since those appraisals were completed, primarily due to anchor tenant loss and regional foot traffic decline. The Cleveland development has lost 22%. Using current market values rather than historical ones changes the exposure figure from the internal estimate of $104 million to," she clicked to the next slide, $412 million appeared in large text, centered, no decoration. $412 million, she said, which, against current liquid reserves, creates a gap of $270 million. The board member to the left of Price, a woman, the only other woman in the room, leaned forward and put on her glasses. "Who ran the original valuations?" "The internal risk assessment team," Iris said. "Reporting to the chief risk officer, which is Davis Falk," Ashworth said. The room looked at Falk. Falk's expression had settled into something flat and professional. "These numbers," he said, "are based on a selective reading of the data. The assets in question have recovery potential that this analysis is not accounting for. The Cleveland development has a signed letter of intent from a regional health system that would." "Is that letter of intent binding?" Iris asked. Falk paused. "It's a letter of intent," Iris said. "It's not a lease, it has no legal force, and the health system in question, I checked, has been in active merger discussions with a larger regional network since March. Their real estate expansion is effectively frozen pending the outcome of that merger." She clicked to the next slide. "I have the merger announcement here, if that's useful." There it was on the screen, a press release from 4 weeks ago announcing the exploratory merger talks. The health system's name was in the headline. Falk said nothing. Price looked at the slide for a long time. Then he looked at Iris. Then, very deliberately, he looked at his phone. "I need to speak with counsel before this discussion continues," he said. "That's your right," Ashworth said. "But I want to note for the record that this presentation has already been shared with the Federal Reserve's Atlanta office and with the OCC. Gerald filed the disclosure last Friday." The temperature in the room changed. Iris watched it happen. The small recalibrations, the eyes that moved to different faces, the board member to Price's right, who quietly closed the folio he'd been writing in, as if suddenly uncertain what the notes might look like later. Price's jaw tightened. He looked at Iris with the undisguised expression of a man who had just realized that the woman he'd written off in a preliminary email was the reason his photograph might not stay on that hallway wall much longer. "You understand," he said quietly, "that this creates significant disruption to the firm, to employees, to clients." "I understand that," Iris said, "and you find that acceptable." She looked at him for a moment before answering, not to compose herself. She was already composed. She looked at him the way you look at something you've seen before, something you've cataloged and filed and moved through and arrived on the other side of. "What I find acceptable," she said, "is accurate information. What the firm does with accurate information is the firm's decision." She closed her laptop. The board member with the glasses, the one who had asked about the valuations, said quietly, "Thank you, Ms. Beaumont-Cole." Iris nodded once. She picked up her folder and walked to the door. Behind her, she heard Price say something to the man to his left, low and tight. She didn't catch the words. She didn't need to. In the hallway, she stopped for a moment near one of the framed photographs. This one was from 1987. 4 men in front of a building she didn't recognize. Brass plate. Smiling like the future was already arranged. She looked at it for 3 seconds. Then she walked to the elevator. Hector was still at the desk when she came through the lobby. She stopped. "How'd it go?" he asked. She thought about this. "It went," she said. He nodded like that was enough, because it was. She walked through the revolving door and onto the sidewalk. The morning was overcast gray, in the particular way of cities that don't notice their own weight. She stood for a moment and looked for a cab. Across the street, a man in a hard hat was pressure washing the sidewalk in front of a deli, methodically, working from one end to the other. The water ran into the gutter in long, thin channels. She watched this for a moment. She wasn't sure why. Then she raised her hand and a cab pulled over and she got in. The story, as these stories sometimes do, moved faster than anyone expected after that. The regulatory filings that Ashworth had submitted on Friday triggered a formal examination request from the OCC within 9 days. Meridian's commercial real estate positions were placed under enhanced monitoring. The 3 properties in question had their loan covenants reviewed by the servicers, who confirmed Iris's figures within a margin of 4%. Davis Falk placed himself on administrative leave 11 days after the board presentation. He cited personal reasons. The internal announcement used the word temporarily. Harmon Price resigned from the board on a Wednesday morning, effective immediately, with a statement that described the decision as part of a planned transition. No journalist who covered the financial sector believed this, and several said so in print. The $270 million gap was addressed through a structured capital raise, a negotiated workout on the Cleveland property, and the sale of one of the mall complexes to a regional operator at a loss that the firm could absorb. Now that the loss had been accurately measured, it was not painless. Meridian's stock dropped 14% in the 2 weeks following the disclosure. 340 employees in the commercial real estate division had their roles reviewed. Some were retained, some were not. A financial journalist named Claudette Voss wrote the most thorough account of what had happened, published in a regional business publication that syndicated the piece nationally. The headline was, "The Auditor They Didn't Want in the Building." She interviewed Ashworth, 2 anonymous board members, and 3 former Meridian analysts who had each, at different points, flagged concerns about the portfolio valuations internally and been told the concerns were noted. Iris Beaumont-Cole declined the interview request. Voss described her in the piece anyway, drawing on public record and the recollections of people who had been in the building that morning. She described the lobby. She described the 9 o'clock that started at 9:32. She described the shoes. The piece was read widely, shared in the particular corridors where these things get shared: compliance offices, risk management firms, the inboxes of federal examiners who had spent years watching the same numbers get smoothed in the same ways. Several people forwarded it without comment. Several forwarded it with a single line that said something like, "This is exactly what we've been talking about." Iris read it once, standing in her kitchen at 6 in the morning, her coffee going cold beside the sink. She got to the paragraph about the lobby. She read the line about the shoes. She thought about it for a moment. Then she finished the coffee and went to work. She had 3 other clients. 2 of them had findings that were going to require conversation similar to the one in boardroom A. She had her notes. She had her folder. She had, in the pocket of her briefcase, the printed email from Gerald Ashworth that she'd shown to Hector Wynne in the lobby, which she hadn't thrown away for reasons she hadn't fully worked out. Maybe she'd kept it because it said what it said plainly, without hedging. The board has reviewed your preliminary findings and requests your formal presentation. Not suggested, not considered, requested. She had been in this work for 27 years. She had sat in the lobby before. She had waited, and she had been looked at, and she had watched men in expensive suits say things to each other in the particular register. That means she doesn't count. She had known, each time, that the only language that would be heard was the language she was carrying in the folder, not because the world had become fair, but because numbers, rendered correctly, were very hard to dismiss without consequences. The shoes were still on her feet when she walked into the next building. They'd walked 10,000 miles, and they had the creases to prove it. She pressed the elevator button and waited, and she did not look at the security desk to see if anyone was watching her, because she had stopped needing to check a long time ago.